You're tuned to 1520 WCHE Radio, and it's time now for the Avid Reader Show with your host, Sam Hankin. Sam will offer reviews and interviews of some of the more interesting books and authors of today, and now Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. And as I always say, it's one of the last independent bookshops in the area, which is a shame, but true. Today, we are very lucky to have as our guest GeorgeSaunders. He is an author who is best known for his short stories and novellas, which is unusual in this day and age when the short story sometimes seems to have fallen out of fashion. But these short stories are great. He's well known for his previous collection, Civil War Land in Bad Decline, Pastoralia, and In Persuasion Nation. He also has won both the MacArthur and the Guggenheim Fellowship, and the book is amazing in the beginning because you get praise from Jennifer Egan, who we interviewed, Zadie Smith, David Foster Wallace, my hero, Karen Russell, who we also interviewed, and Thomas Pynchon, who never comes out except to appear as a voice on The Simpsons. So in any event, George, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, does anyone ever confuse you with the actor GeorgeSaunders, even though he was...
Yeah, all the time. I don't know why. Because I don't think... He was the guy who was the voice of the tiger in Jungle Book, I think. So I don't know,
Yeah, he had a great voice. He was born 52 years before you. And it's funny, yeah. I did the same thing. But it's a great name, but it's not even your name.
But he's also the one who I think he left a note saying, I'm leaving because I'm bored. So
yes, he did. Which
is so not me. I'm clinging because I'm desperate.
Well, I just don't plan to die, so it's easy for me.
No. I'm on the same plan.
Well, so, like, when you won the MacArthur Fellowship and you got, like, this tons of money, how did you feel? Did you go out and buy, like, a Lamborghini and a Rolex Presidential or anything?
No, we actually had, at that time, we had two daughters about to start college, so that money was well spent, and we hadn't really been in a position to put too much money away, so it just was perfect timing, and, it was well used. So, but it was exciting, and there's definitely a couple weeks of tipping bigger.
Here's a good question. Well, of course, I think it's good. What was more exciting, when you got your first short story sold and went out and bought a steak dinner, or when you got the MacArthur?
The MacArthur, for sure. Yeah. No, I was actually, what made it really fun was I was on a job for GQ down at the Mexican border, and I had just come off this long overnight thing with those Minutemen, the kind of militia guys.
Yes.
So I've been up for about 30 hours, and it was just fun. It was so kind of an adventure. And then got in this hotel and kind of got the news to call them the next day. My wife had said that they'd called, and so it was just kind of this great overnight feeling, like, is that possible? Could I have gotten that? And then so it was really definitely a lot of fun.
I've never won anything. I won an award for being dead last in a bowling tournament.
How did that feel? Was that?
It felt humiliating.
Yeah.
Much like any one of your characters.
Yeah. I'm just writing that idea down. Hold on a second.
Oh, no, authors do this to me all the time. Then I see it in their book, and I feel like, I could have done that. That's horrible. Don't do it. Don't put dead last.
Did they actually give you an award for being last?
Yeah, and then I try to rationalize, like your characters always do in their interior monologues, and think, wow, I just got this. And then I remembered, just like when he steps from behind the paper curtain and thinks, these people really think I'm cool looking.
Yeah, well, that's our tendency, isn't it? But that's kind of mean that somebody would think up to give the last place person an award. That's kind of...
It sounds exactly like your memorandum in the book.
Yeah.
See, the things you write, you first look at it and you go, well, this could never happen. They could never hang. These girls could never be strung. And then you realize how close to reality a lot of what you write really is. And I guess you already know that.
Well, and also I kind of think of them as being a little bit like in science when you do an end condition study. You want to know something about a material. Then what you do is you put it in extreme heat or extreme cold or something. So I've come up with elaborate ways of justifying the darkness in my stories. But one of them is to say, if you want to know what a human being is like, you find something out by looking at him on a typical day when everything was going right. But from my experience, I found out a lot about myself in those moments when things were just comically going badly. Then what resources do you have to bear, and how does that mental loop in your head go on the very worst day you ever had?
That's funny because that's one of the things everyone says. your writing is comedic, but at the same time, it's not. And I was thinking, how gradually in the memorandum he talks about, all the horrible things we do in room 6.
Yeah.
Well, it reminded me of room 101 in 1984.
Right.
But room 101 in 1984 was about as tragic as you could get and as horrible as you can get. You just give intimations here gradually. First, everything seems fine. And then you eventually realize that what happens in room 6 might be just as equally as, horrific.
I think it probably is. I've always been kind of interested in that idea of, since we live roughly in the historical period of the Holocaust, and certainly there are Holocausts going on all the time, just been interested in the fact that whoever is doing that stuff can't be that much different than we are. And even though it seems unthinkable to me that I would ever, do something like that or participate in that or turn the other way, that it happened. That people just like us were in Germany in 1938 and so on. So I sometimes I just feel an urge to kind of come up to that idea a little bit and just push it and say, if there was an American Holocaust, what would it look like and sound like? How would it justify itself? And how would it sneak up on us? Because I don't think anybody says, hey, let's have a genocide, or let's do something really horrific. I think, somehow that when those things happen, they seem almost reasonable to the people who are participating. So that story was kind of just a little of a thought experiment along those lines.
Well, I always thought of it, there's a very thin veneer of civilization. It's kind of like the crust on a creme brulee. Don't use that. Don't use that in your book.
Okay, all right.
So it's like, like Bill O'Reilly. If he lived in Germany in 1932, who would he work for? Work for Hitler. So would Rush Limbaugh. It's just, things that would happen. They're natural. And, it's you think of all the pain that's been inflicted by religions and countries over all these years, and you can't even imagine. There's no way you can come close to imagining how much there is. And then, you try to codify it to a certain extent in the Semplika girls. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing that's interesting to me and a little bit grisly is to think, okay, so I know that in my time and place, I'm a completely upstanding person who knows enough to look back at the Holocaust or the Rwandan genocide in a certain way. But then I kind of wonder, especially as I get older, like if I was in Germany in 1938, would I have had the clarity of vision and the integrity and the fearlessness to do what was really necessary? And I wonder, because I'm not a spineless person, but I'm also kind of, I'm just a normal person. So that story, that Semplika Girl Diaries, was kind of turned out to be a little bit of an exploration of how a really good guy, like I think he's a really good guy, good father, good husband, says all the right things, thinks all the right things, how it would be for him to be participating in a really kind of terrible thing that he didn't see as terrible because of the cultural encoding that he participates in. So that was a really fun but also kind of strange one, because I genuinely like that guy, and I think a reader would like him. And then you look up and he's participating in this kind of monstrous thing with no, he's not like a Cruella de Vil saying, yeah, I'm evil. He's a guy who really believes in his own goodness, and I think we kind of do too by the end of it.
It's funny. It's hard to, you can kind of envision the technology that exists to try to essentially string these people together, but it's really hard to, like, you know what I mean? It's like in my mind I'm trying to figure out how did they actually, the construction of this thing,
Yeah.
That's
my thought was that they were kind of, because I have all that written, I just didn't, I'm a big proponent of the iceberg theory, so I would write that stuff and then leave it out. But basically, there's a guy, Semplika, who has figured out a way to do all this with sort of minimally invasive, and there's all kinds of supports and stuff that are also put in surgically, and so I think part of it is, if as a former engineer, if you explain that stuff too much, then that's when the doubts flood in. Whereas if you're sort of hinting at it, then maybe you can do a little sleight of hand and get away with it. I'm sure it's not actually possible. I hope not, anyway.
No, but it's also like what you do with the recombinant drugs that you use in several of your stories. It's like you don't have to. They're like a Duas Machina or whatever. Where like Verbalus, for example.
Yeah.
You know what that reminds me of is, remember that book Flowers for Algernon and the movie Charlie? Doesn't it remind you of that? It's just not as tragic.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah,
that story was very good. That really moved me when I was a kid.
Yeah, Yeah, it was written by Daniel Keyes, the year you were born,
Yeah.
1958. But
yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think that the technology stuff is, you know, if you go fast enough, the person won't really question it. And also, you know, if you think about if somebody was writing a story about today, let's say somehow let's say you were in 1880 and you're trying to write a sci-fi book about 2013. If you had a thing called a cell phone, you wouldn't really have an occasion to go into the mechanics. It would just be assumed. Oh, well, yeah, I picked up the cell phone and then talked. So in a way, you can get away with a lot, you know. And I think also if the sci-fi concept that you're using yields enough fruit, nobody questions it. Like nobody you know cries foul for Kafka when he turns Gregor Samsa into a bug, mostly because it works. You know, it's so interesting, and he does so many beautiful things with it that you just kind of grant him that license.
you know, it's funny, the things that, you know, he wrote that in one night, and he must have been so miserable to write it in one night. You know, that's the thing, is he must have been so miserable. But the two things that get me are the dust that collects around his body and the apple that's lodged in his carapace.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
That apple really bothers me, but it's also so real.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's
the
perfect.
thing that gets me about that story is that you know, he has a real opportunity to blow it in the first page when he says Gregor's been turned into a bug, and then instead of having Gregor go, "Oh my God, I'm a bug," the first thought is that he's going to be late for work.
Yeah.
And for me, that's where that story really
right. And then he spends.
I wonder if he was miserable, because can you imagine being in such a state of mind that you could write the Metamorphosis in one night? That would have to be, I mean, in a certain way, exquisite to have your act together that much and to see it that clearly and to write that beautifully. I think
I don't know.
I'd love to try it.
You write things that sometimes have exquisite pain in them. You know, there is this moment of exquisitivity.
It takes me 9 months. I can't imagine what it would be like to do it in one night like that.
That's your you have a regular gestation period. That's good.
Yeah, 9 months.
But, you know, it's true, especially when he's like rolling out of bed and he has to figure out how to get all those legs, and all he's trying to do is get dressed to go to work.
Yeah, it's incredible. And he thinks about his boss, and he thinks about how to get on the bus, and that's a real masterstroke, I think.
There's a book called The Half-Life of Gregor Samsa that talks about how the charwoman didn't really actually sweep him out of the room. She sold him to a circus where he became like a freak show kind of guy.
Ouch.
I know. You know, like, it's funny, like, you do certain things that are kind of, like, first you think, why is he doing this? And then it kind of seems, like, in Victory Lap, when Allison is beginning, and she's such a sweet person, and when you do Special One, when she's looking for Special One, instead of using parentheses or brackets, you use, what are they? I don't even know what they're called.
I don't either. They're like...
What are they?
They're like, I don't know. They're like technical brackets.
Well, you must have thought of a reason. Why did you do it?
It just looked better. I don't know. I mean, that to me, that's one of the sort of under-discussed truths of art, is that sometimes you just like something better. You can't. There's no elaborate description, but, you know, maybe as you're approaching that thing, you're kind of going through the possibilities. It could be italics, it could be parentheses, and that thing just looked weird.
It does look weird.
Yeah, and you don't really know how to read it, so therefore you read it. Hopefully, you know, you read it in some new way. So I mean, there's so many things where I think we're used to discussing writing as if the writer was Captain Intention. You know, like he knew everything he wanted. He did it for a reason. He had it all planned in advance. But my experience is it's much more intuitive and on the fly, and just because, you know, I like it. I don't know why. I can't really justify it. You know, so a lot like sports or like music, you know, there's just a certain amount of intuition and preference that the writer's expressing at speed.
Well, I'm glad you explained it, because when I first saw it, I thought the same thing you're describing is, okay, what does this mean? Why is this different? And then it actually made sense to me, but I could never articulate why it made sense, and neither can you.
Right. No, and that's a kind of an amazing thing, you know, the idea that we could feel and process information that's sort of actually subarticulable. That's a very hopeful thing, I think, that it's not just all a linear one-for-one exchange. You know, there's an idea and you get it and you can discuss it, but rather that things are happening faster than you can reduce, and that means your mind I mean, the mind is so complicated and rich, and we definitely feel all those things. So
well, it's funny. It's like E. E. Cummings. You know, you think he woke up one day and said, "Hey, I'm not going to use punctuation anymore,"
right?
Or capital letters. I mean, no one else had done it, but it worked perfectly.
Yeah, and you get the sense it's probably some kind of. I've had this feeling that it's just sort of the artist squirming a little bit. Like, I just don't want to use capital letters again. It makes it look too predictable. And then, so in that uncomfortableness, you squirm and you do something else. And basically, the art consists of sort of laying your hands on it and saying, "I bless you. I see that I've done this. I accept it." You know. So I think for Americans, you know, I'm a former engineer, and there's a certain amount of resistance to an idea that you can't quite articulate, and yet we do it all the time. And some of our most profound insights are subarticulable.
Yeah, I had an argument with an author about that because everything he wanted had to be empiric. It was, why is there something rather than nothing? And yeah, it had to be empirical. And I was saying, you know, sometimes, but he wouldn't have it. He was totally a physicist, and he wouldn't have it any other way. That it had to be empirical, otherwise it wasn't true. And I look down upon you because you're not an empiricist. But
yeah, I think that I feel like that. I mean, this strict empiricism to me kind of got played out a long time ago, and keeps doing so over and over. It's a great tool, but you know, anybody who drives a car knows that you're making intuitive adjustments without being able to, you know, you don't say left hand move 2.5 centimeters to the left to affect a change in the wheels of 4.7 degrees. You know, you're just feeling it. So.
Right, and he closed the system, and I don't like to live a life where you close systems. It seems silly. Yeah. Everybody does it, whether you're pro-abortion or anti-abortion. You just don't listen to each other.
And we're actually doing it right now. Actually,
how so?
We're closing the system that says we will never close our systems.
Oh, we're getting into Goodell's theory of incompleteness.
Yeah,
I don't want to do that, but that's what a science fiction writer does. But not that you are. You know, it's like your science fiction is. Your books are informed by science fiction. They're not really science fiction stories.
Yeah, and actually they're probably informed by science fiction movies, because I never really read that much sci-fi.
Really?
I saw a lot of TV and a lot of movies, but I never was. As a kid, I wasn't that drawn to sci-fi for whatever reason.
That is interesting. I had a question that Victory Lap kind of gives you an example. How do you come up with your names? Like, you know, it's Allison Pope and Kyle Boot. And I'm just wondering, I mean, do they just pop into your head? It's like the ellipsis or whatever it is.
They just pop into my head, and I would like them to be as unfreighted as possible. You know, like when somebody's named, you know, Mike Misgiving or something. I don't really go for that. So
I don't know. Pope and Boot. I mean, they're words.
They're words. Yeah.
But they actually mean stuff. It's not like McGovern.
Yeah.
All the reckonings.
They do, but they don't. I mean, put it this way: I think they probably, even as you say that, I could make a defense for both. Why it wouldn't be reversed, for example.
Okay.
But I can promise you, at speed, it was just. This sounds good to me, and so that's. You know, it goes back to what we're talking about. Your subconscious is really smart, and it'll pop out a word that you, on the surface, you'll say, "Oh, I just like the way it sounds," but then when you look at it, there's actually something good about it. But I would say that whatever is good in those two names is the process of thinking them out in advance would have made it worse. Put it that way.
Right. Well, it's like if you look at Escape from Spiderhead. So there you have Abnesti, you have Rachel and Heather, which are just regular, and Verlaine, which for some reason is so evocative. I don't even know why.
Yeah.
And then you have Jeff. Go ahead.
I've never read Verlaine, so it's just kind of like, you know, the best I can describe it is when you're doing it, you're kind of excited to be, you're trying to be in the room with those people, and you feel that there's another character about to show up, and sometimes the name just appears before the guy does. Sometimes it has to do with you know, like, he's going to actually appear at the precise moment that his name does, you know, in the story. So someone turns to call somebody and they go, Robinson, you know, it just comes out, and then it becomes sort of woven into the sound fabric of the story. And then, you know, once you've named a guy Verlaine, I don't know, like he kind of comes up in your mind a little bit, and then weirdly his name starts affecting what he says or does. So it's all kind of complicated, but not thought out in advance very much.
Yeah, but it does all kinds of cool things. Like, you know, first you think Abnesti's in charge, but he's not even in charge of himself. You know, he's kind of confused, and then Verlaine all of a sudden takes on this greater importance, and the name is associated, but you don't really. It's once again like the brackets. You can't explain why.
Right, and I think if his name was Rogers, it's different. For Lane,
Yeah.
somehow, I don't know, and with a name like that, you got a certain self-possession. I always picture him being dressed kind of nicely. And,
Yes.
So, yeah, definitely.
And Amnesty's kind of not sloppy and slovenly, but he's got this, he knows what he's doing, anyway, but, you know.
Yeah, well, also, but even, it's funny, as you say that, it's hard to say Amnesty. Like, when I read that story, I always feel, oh, no, that name's come up. For Lane, it's easier to say. You like saying that. So I would say even at some level, when Amnesty comes in, the reader's kind of, in his head, a little fumbling with the name.
Yeah. It's like when you come up with names for cars or cigarettes or something like that, or drugs.
Right.
Drugs for God.
Right.
And you come up with tons of names for drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, you could work for a pharmaceutical company. Verbalus is really good.
I did. I used to.
Darkenfloss, they would never buy that. Well, yeah, they would.
No, I used to work for a pharmaceutical company in Albany, and I didn't do the naming, but we did I did animal test reports. So we would get these big volumes of animal tests and have to take like 5,000 pages and summarize them down to 180 or something for the FDA. So definitely saw my share of drug names. And, although at that point it's usually a number. I think when it's in the experimental stage, just give a 5-digit number.
But yeah, there's some great drugs. It's just that I wouldn't want to take any of them.
No.
Another thing, like with the names, is like in Puppy, because you got a father who, no matter what anyone does, just says ho ho ho.
Right.
And it's like, okay, what the hell is that supposed to mean? And then all of a sudden it takes on all these nuances, like, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy because he says that? And you have to, the reader has to decide. Well, do you think the reader has to decide?
I think the reader has to feel something about that, probably. I always thought that a story is like a good story is a bit like a hologram. There's all kinds of, let's say, a three-dimensional hologram of a little vignette. You could sort of go in there and walk around it, and if you felt like it, you could look at it from the side. You could make a point of examining all the shoes of the different people in the hologram. You could do whatever you wanted, and depending on when you did it, you would have a different experience. So, in a way, I think the writer's job is to make the hologram really detailed and really evocative, so that however somebody comes at it, they find something there. I noticed that, like in Huck Finn. If you read Huck Finn and you just happen to have it in your mind to think about gender, say some theory of gender, you'll find all kinds of stuff in Huck Finn about gender. Or if you say I'm going to look at the whole book from the point of view of different river geographies, the book will reward critical stance, that critical stance. So I think with when I feel like I'm working pretty well, it's not really, I'm not trying to do anything really, but I'm experiencing that world so richly that all kinds of details pop out. And when I look at it after the fact, the details are interesting together. And if you wanted to, for example, to construct that father, even though he's not really in the story, I think he could do it. And I think he would be a good counterpart to his wife. They're kind of playing a sort of a tag team with their kids. So yes. I mean, I think you should. It would make me happy if a person could come away and write a paper about that father, even though he's only got one line in the whole story. Well,
it's funny that you said that about Huck, because are you the guy that said someone asked you who would you like to have a drink with, and you said Huckleberry Finn, except he's too young?
Yeah, I think so.
That's
I think
funny.
I said that somewhere.
So you must really think about him a lot.
Yeah, that's an incredible book. I wrote an introduction for that was supposed to take me 2 weeks, and it took me like 3 months, because it's just such a great, so much for any American writer to learn from that book. And yeah, I think we're still. I'm sitting in this little small town up here in upstate New York, and I'm looking at these houses, and any one of them could be Huck's house. They're kind of these old, sagging frame houses, and he could walk out of one any minute now. Would he be wearing like a Metallica shirt or something now? Probably.
Yeah, like Beavis and Butthead.
Yeah.
But it's funny because have you started to read or read or tried to read the recently released autobiography? That was supposed to be held for 100 years from.
I read pages. I haven't systematically sat down and said yet. No. Have you?
Well, because it's in my bookstore, I have time to do that every once in a while. But right. No one buys it. But yeah. I can read it. So what was I just going to ask you something about that? Well, I'll think of it. So like everyone talks about, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but everybody talks about. Is it Semplica or Semplica?
The first way, Semplica.
Semplica. So everyone talks about that as if it's the seminal story of this collection. Do you agree? I mean,
it was the last one that I finished for sure, and it's the longest. So I don't know. I'm pretty fond of the title story as kind of the. I think the title story is in my way of thinking right now, it's the most artistically complete thing in the book. But that Simple Girls, it means a lot to me because it took me about 12 years to finish it, and it was with me all those years on and off, and I couldn't figure it out. And so, and there's probably at least that many pages, probably twice as many that I finished but couldn't get into the story. So that's definitely an old kind of problematic friend that I've had around for a long time.
You have characters that there's a moment in their lives when they can lift something and put it down or throw it down, and it's that moment that they kind of define themselves. And then there's all kinds of repercussions afterwards, whether it's thank you for your service or whether it's her saying something that may not really be true. It's like they have this moment, and it's almost physicality. It's like when you're driving down the road, I'm sure you've done this, and you go, hey, if I just moved my hand 6 inches, that could be the end of my life.
Yeah.
And the same thing is true in the in the first story, that movement didn't have to occur, and yet everything still would have been okay. The problem would have been solved.
Right. Well, thank you. One of the things that I like that description, and one way that you try to get that is by really spending a lot of time with the story. So, by revising them pretty heavily, you get to sort of intimately know all the possible off-ramps where the character could do this, but is it better if he does A, B, or C? And then, what I do is I basically try B and C and go, that was not it, and go back and do A. So there's a way in which I think you can see a story as a rhetorical argument, and maybe part of the writer's job is to go ahead and sort of eliminate the boring or the non-productive solutions, which then has the desirable effect of kind of roping the reader in more closely to whatever does happen. In other words, if I make the right choices and I rule out the ones that are less logically strong, then when you get to the end, you have the feeling that there wasn't a lot of wiggle room. You didn't really have it. You're sort of bound in with the character in whatever choice he or she has made.
Well, another way of looking at it is it's almost symphonic, because Kyle has this build-up, and the build-up has nothing to do with the situation. It has to do with the way he's reared and the requirements of that rearing.
Right.
And it's like, okay, and well, it's not like, it is. That final movement is really derived from, okay, man, I have just had enough of this. I just cannot take this anymore. Hey, so do you think anyone ever plants geodes in yards? Why would you plant a geode in a yard?
Oh, because you don't plant them, but you put them out in a display. Like you might put out some of these real big ones, put out 7 or 8 of them, like lawn ornaments.
I can see doing it with like those amethyst things, but the geodes are always round, so you cut them in half. I don't know, unless you put it on a stand. I don't know about the geodes.
It's a big country. Big country.
Can I use that one?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's like it's funny because there's lots of gardens in your book too.
Oh, I'm kind of a gardening guy. No, I'm really not. No, I mean, it's one of the things about fiction that's fun is if you can think it up, no matter how weird it is, if you work with it, it starts to make a little sense. Like for that particular guy, his dad just likes those, big old geodes, and could you find that in America? Probably, but fiction, it doesn't have to necessarily be the statistical mean. It's just if one freak show in the world does it, then there you go, you're good.
Oh, yeah, and the other thing, it took me so long, and I still have problems with it, that you can lie as much as you want when you write. It took me like, well, I can't lie about that. It's like stand-up comedians getting up and telling the same jokes every night. That always bothered me, because when I give speeches and I'm trying to give the same speech, I can't do it because it just seems like it's not right to give the same speech over and over again, which you have to do a lot, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually, I think, a skill that you develop is to make this. These stand-up guys make it sound like they're just thinking it up in real time. But in fiction too, I mean, I never think of it as lying so much because it announces itself as a story. So we're just going to have some fun. We're going to play a game, and it's a game basically of what if. Like I say, well, okay, what if there was a guy who, blah blah blah, and The only thing that works there is that you have to agree to the lie, agree to accept it conditionally, and I have to agree to make it worth your while, basically. So if I say, once upon a time there was a dog with two heads, first you go, no, there wasn't, and I go, I know there wasn't, but let's pretend. What if there was? You go, okay, I'll give you that one. And then from there, the game begins, And so at that point, it becomes my job to sort of validate whatever thing I've done. Like when Kafka turned Gregor into a bug. We all know that doesn't happen, but Kafka said, I know it doesn't, but what if it did? And then he said, trust me on this. You're going to learn something essential about human nature if you just give me that one concession, And I think that's the game.
Yeah, when I was a kid, when I used to read stuff, I used to pretend that it was just another world, that ours was like a book, and then the rest of them were like a book too, and they were all just other worlds. And
which is right. Yeah, I think that's right.
It's funny. I meant to say this before, but when Jennifer Egan was on here, and it was after she had written "Visit from the Goon Squad," which won the Pulitzer Prize, and it was terrible what I said. I said something about, I don't understand. I said no one's going to understand what a visit from the Goon Squad means, because it was from an Elvis Costello song, and it meant the vagaries of time. And I said, so it's kind of an odd title. And she goes, I think it's a great title. And I said, yeah, but one of your characters in your books even says he doesn't know what it means. So then later on we were talking about it, I said, oh, well, next time you write a book with a lousy title, maybe you won the Pulitzer Prize again. She got really mad. And it just popped out of my mouth. I didn't mean to say anything like that. And I don't know why I'm telling you that.
It's kind of a great title, actually. Because
well, yeah, it is. And I said all this stuff. I felt horrible. And then I tried to write her a note of apology. But writers, after you interview them, never write you back. It's a rule, I think.
I will.
Okay.
If you apologize for something you say today, I'll definitely write you back.
What did I say? Did I say something
Nothing.
bad?
Yeah, so far you've been a perfect gentleman, so I don't know.
Well, so like in, unfortunately, and this kind of, you made me mad here, because if you read Al Rustin, unfortunately I identify with the guy.
Me too.
I mean, when he's kicking the keys in the wallet, I mean, it's like, could I do that? It's just like you were saying before. Could I do that, and then would I not go back? But then he rationalizes everything, and then he counter-rationalizes everything.
Right.
It can drive the reader. It drives the reader crazy.
Yeah, unlike any of us. I think that's, for me, the most enjoyable thing is to kind of, in fiction, you can be really truthful, actually, about your own inclinations. Not that we're, depending on who we are, we're probably pretty good at resisting certain negative inclinations. But the presence of the negative inclination is really interesting, I think. The kind of pissy thing that you do, or think or say or whatever. And I think that fiction is a great place to just bring that forward and go, I've definitely had this impulse, or one could have this impulse, and then just let it play. To me, that's the comic impulses. It's not, everyone sees a banana peel. And I don't think anyone in the history of the world has ever actually slipped on a banana peel. You'd have to be really stupid, But it's a funny idea. And so in some ways with a comic story, you're just saying, oh, there's a banana peel, ho-ho, and you're making the guy fall on it. So, yeah, I think that's, for me, that was a big step when I went from being kind of like a Hemingway guy, and in that mode I was always resisting the way I actually thought and felt, because none of Hem's people would be so stupid. But then when you kind of go, actually I am kind of a putz, and I do a lot of dumb things, and I think really weird, I have really strange projective fantasies, and then it was really fun to start just letting those in.
And the funniest thing about comedic writing, and how yours is very similar, is the idea of laughing at someone slipping on a banana peel. You're only laughing because of someone's misfortune. It's just a misfortune that's unexpected and utilizes this strange device.
Right, and the thing is, too, though, if you were writing a story about a guy slipping on a banana peel, the real comedy would come from the stuff you would think just before and just after. You know, like, well, better not step on that. And, oh, you idiot, And then, of course, the part where you hop up to make sure that, that stuff, it's so deeply human that it's just fun to go there, I think, a little bit. And it's not actually, in some ways, it's kinder than a movie of a guy falling on a banana peel, because if you're in the head of the guy, it's you. It's both you, and it's me, the writer, and it's this third entity, which is sort of the unity of us, So it's morally really interesting, as opposed to if you're just watching a movie of something humiliating happen, I think you could argue that might be a little harsher, but to be in the head of the guy, then it's kind of softening in a nice way.
Well, it's funny because the one that really gets me is, and it works in all three persons, is like if other people are watching somebody going down the street and he trips over an uneven elevation in the slate walk, what's the first thing after he trips? He looks back and he's like, "What? Why was that? I didn't trip."
How did that suddenly appear? I had a friend who pointed out how funny it is that when you're walking down the street and you realize you forgot your keys, you always stop and pat your pockets, even though you could be 20 miles away. You could have just gotten off an airplane, and if you realize you left your keys back at the last security thing, you always stop. So those kind of things, I think, are they're fun. They're actually as grandiose as we tend to be. That's actually what life is kind of made up, is those little tiny hesitations and screw ups. And
I do that yesterday I was coming back from New York on the train, and I took my backpack and I put the key to my car in the zippered pocket where I couldn't possibly leave because I didn't need my key in New York. So then on the way back on the train, as soon as I got on the train, I thought I need to take my key out. But why would I need to take my key out? I have an hour.
Right.
But I resisted it. I resisted the urge, and then all kinds of things went on in my head about, I'm resisting the urge. Isn't that good? I'm a great guy. Or
right. Yeah. No, I mean, to me that might be, for me anyway, that's some of the great unworked material of future fiction. It's just the 1,000 little things that your mind does in those split seconds that you're not intending to do it. They just do it. And then, of course, those moments where those projections and those thoughts become so powerful that they lead you to act. That's really, a very interesting thing.
Right.
And I think that it's great. I mean, it makes great style. You can have a lot of fun with it. But, when you think about, like a road rage incident or something, that's literally two thought streams colliding, two completely innocuous, probably self-justifying thought streams, and then they happen to be associated with bodies, and next thing you know, there's two people fighting on the side of the street because of their thoughts.
And it's hilarious.
It is, especially when you think that nobody intended for it to happen, nobody would want it to happen. In a calmer moment, they would resist it. So I think for me, there's a lot of fictional hay to be made in that, just that notion of two people sitting next to each other on a church pew, both having their separate days and their thought streams, and then at one point, maybe there's an armrest between them, and
right.
The one guy says, "Hey, why does he have 3/4 of the armrest when he should only have half?"
Or like when you're walking down the street and you don't know whether you're supposed to move to the right to avoid the person who's coming at you, and then I go through a big thought process on that too. Right,
and depending on what the other person is thinking, that could be World War III.
I know. Well, basically 7 seasons of Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm is based on that exact process.
Yeah.
And it's hilarious, like we were saying.
Deeply universal.
And then, so much of your stuff is an interior monologue. The entire story is, like that. And then I thought of James Joyce and Ulysses and the Nighttown episode. All that is just, the whole book is basically inside of somebody's head and what happens there. But
yeah, I think that's really an incredible, in terms of fiction and what where it's always been going. I think the idea of trying to document 5 seconds in the human head is it's impossible. First of all, because how would you know? But also, it's so rich. There's so much that goes on that isn't really. You couldn't really translate it into writing directly.
No.
But it's a Virginia Woolf. I mean, she's so wonderful at that.
Well, it's like you were saying. We were discussing in a funny way a closed system before. I mean, you're trying to utilize the tool in writing that you're actually trying to utilize. You're trying to explain what's inside someone's mind by using, that mind. It's it is again the same kind of thing. It's it's like a Turing machine. You can't actually.
Right, and also the exciting thought is that if I'm thinking of 3 people, it's me. I'm the controlling consciousness behind the 3 projections of people. So I know it's not. I think an easy misunderstanding of it is that you're doing research so you can know what the other person is thinking, but I think that's impossible. So what's really happening, it's more interesting, is that you're generating a 90-year-old man who was in World War II, and you're generating a 14-year-old kid who who hates his life, and maybe you're even generating a dog if you want, and where are they coming from? Well, they're coming from your phenomenon and your projection and your experience of life. So it's an incredibly complicated thing that actually probably shouldn't be meaningful. When you think about it, how weird it is and how solipsistic it is. Well, and yet somehow you read Tolstoy and you feel deeply in communication with somebody.
Well, exactly the opposite of Anna Karenina is your story Styx. I mean, you take Styx. I mean, I don't know how long it took you to write, but it's 2 pages, Yeah. I had to look back today because I was thinking about this. I wanted to look at each story. And I realized, wait a minute, I thought this was a really long story. And then I flipped back and forth. It's 2 pages.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, but it's a tragedy. How do you have a tragedy in 2 pages? So what did you do there?
I don't remember. I wrote that a long time ago. I think like in 1994. And I remember being at work, and I just was stuck on something else. And I thought, I'm just going to write 3 really short pieces. And I just banged that one out, and 2 other ones that weren't quite as good. But, yeah, I don't know. I had driven by we were coming home from church, and I drove by just what I described in that story. A guy had a pole kind of driven in his front yard, and he had some kind of, I think it was Super Bowl Sunday, so he had it dressed up like a Buffalo Bills, guy kind of. And I just thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And my first thought was, this is one of those micro moves we talked about. My first thought was, that guy's a much better person than me, because I do not have my act together, to put a pole in the yard and get out there and put the helmet on it. Oh man, he must really be a big-hearted lover of life. So that was my first impulse, guilt. That I was so inadequate. And then just at one point, I just felt like, I was literally driving away from the thing, and I thought, well, reverse that. What if he's not? What if actually this thing he's doing comes out of a different motivation? And then I just sort of, let it sit, and then the next day at work, just type it up.
Yeah, and there was a lot of time that passed in those 2 pages, which was also really interesting.
Yeah, that was sort of at that time I think I was writing Civil Warland, and almost everything was, in scene, and everything was just moving ahead by 2 minutes, and so it was kind of just sort of a palate cleanser to say, I'm just going to cover 30 years in 2 pages.
It's funny, you're talking about that feeling of inadequacy, and it's like, I can't put up Christmas lights, it's too much work. And then I justify it by the fact that I'm Jewish, but
that's good.
But it's not, kids love it. My kids love it. I should do it. And then it's not that, I don't know. But then there's other things like, I don't want to be like everybody else, and it's a silly thing to do. And it's just like you were talking about. There's just so many things going on that it's a very rich mine of material.
Yeah. Well, I remember when our kids are grown up, but when they were little, always being in that struggle of wanting to be perceived as, and also wanting to be a really comfortable, low anxiety person, totally at home in the world, always having lavish parties and doing, erring on the side of spaciousness, and then just feeling tired and broke, and having not very much time. And to me, that's like maybe the essential American dilemma is, you want to be, you want to be Fezziwig, right? From Christmas Carol, but you're busy and you're broke, and and so you end up feeling. I always felt a little bit curmudgeonly because I wasn't 100% generous.
It's funny because you do talk a lot about houses and the hierarchy of houses, and
sure,
and keeping up with the Joneses, but it's not really like keeping up with the Joneses. It's like when the daughter wants these kitschy type sculptures, the father wants to get them for her, not because he thinks they're beautiful or because he's even I don't know cultural enough to know, but he wants them for her because he loves her so much.
Yeah, because she wants them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And on the dark side of it, there's that, and there's also he kind of I think he feels like if he can just do that, then he gets himself off a lot of other hooks. In other words, if he's not a terrifically present parent or whatever, or they don't have enough money, if he can just, satisfy her heart's desire, then he can sort of rest easily a little bit. And I certainly felt that, when our kids were little bit.
Yeah.
You just didn't want to be, the one, you didn't want to hurt them in that way. You didn't want them to feel materially deprived somehow.
Well, it's funny. When I was little, when we lived on Ardley Street in Mount Airy, and I wanted a red Schwinn bike, really badly. My father didn't have any money. He had a green panel truck. He was just starting out in building. But I got it for Christmas, which would be a great story. But then I left it outside, and someone stole it that day.
Ouch. Yep.
Right after
Ouch.
I got it. And
on Christmas Day?
Yeah. And then my father actually went out and bought me another one.
Wow.
And
that's a good guy.
He should have taught me a lesson, though.
He did.
If you leave your bike out like that,
He taught you a lesson about generosity.
And love.
Yeah.
But
I mean, in some ways, the things aren't really the point. But in a world where scarcity is sort of endemic, I think, and in our culture, I think maybe we've sort of lost that. Even when I was a kid in the '60s, I can remember, there might be somebody who didn't have a lot, and what you heard from your parents and from the nuns or whoever was always kind of like, well, yes, but they're rich in spirit or whatever. In other words, the idea was that wasn't defining. To be broke, to be poor, that wasn't anything, and you were kind of a dope if you thought it was. And I think that's changed. I think now, subtly, we've kind of internalized the idea that the first condition is to be somewhat prosperous, and then you can do the other things. I mean, I'm generalizing like crazy, but I know when our kids were little, I often felt, yeah, I know. It doesn't matter. We're artists. It doesn't matter that we don't have as much. But I was just always looking for ways to kind of clear the decks on that and keep the wolf away from the door a little bit. Which maybe that's the wrong order. Maybe first you have to. I remember hearing Toni Morrison say that when she was a kid, it was possible to be a dignified poor person. That was not any kind of a stretch or an oxymoron, and she thought that had changed in her lifetime.
Yeah, I think it has too. But at the same time, if you look at that story and he goes and buys the lottery ticket, then he remains irresponsible with regard to the Discover card, with regard to the mortgage, with regard to everything.
Yeah, that's right.
And
because he really could. I mean, at that point, he could pay off his credit card. He could start a college fund, and that's, to me, that was like the big error that he made in that story was to kind of. He went a step too far in that way.
But look, that's America has done that as a country, and all of our people have done that too.
Yeah.
We've essentially mortgaged our future in that fashion by being irresponsible.
Yeah, but at that point in the story, what's funny is you're always trying to steer the boat towards the rapids, and so if in the story he does the right thing, suddenly the energy drops, and okay, good. Well, that's the smart thing to do. But for him to do this, the dumb thing was somehow exhilarating. Even as he was doing it, like, oh no, that's completely the wrong thing. And then that's how you've got something to work with.
Yeah, it's when you go back to the thought experiments that we talked about at the beginning. The cliche one is, if you were on a train track and you saw the train coming and there was a kid, sometimes your child, in front of it, would you jump in front of the train and push the child out of the way? And right. I assume you've thought of that a lot, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, what's funny is when our kids were little, we lived up in this town in New York State, and that actually happened. There was some teenagers who were goofing around on this railroad bridge. It went over the Erie Canal, and they were out there. And I guess the thing was to kind of go out there and just goof around, about halfway. So the train starts coming in. There was a young boy and a young girl who just started dating like a week or two before, and as they were running, she slipped, and her foot went down through the pilings, and he was halfway to the other side, and he came back, and neither one of them made it. So I remember sitting there with the kids. We only lived about 3 or 4 blocks away, and we could hear this incredible, hellish train whistle. Somebody just was laying on the whistle, and that has haunted me for a long time because they weren't engaged, and they hadn't known each other that long. And I'm sure it must have seemed, he's literally running back towards the train. So incredible act of heroism, and you just think, wow, how does that happen, And
you actually heard the whistle. You were there? Not there, but you heard it?
It was a small town, yeah. Everybody was, what's going on with that? Because the train came through every day, but we heard the whistle. And so they were, 14 or 15 years old and just kind of normal teenagers. But that really haunted me because that kid had a choice, and he I mean, I don't know. Like, he could have just said, it's too close, I can't risk it. But he just, what an incredible thing, And in that moment, his impulse was to go back.
There's a story, a science fiction story, about a guy who spends his life in a living hell because his house caught on fire, and he saw his wife and his kid burning up, and he realized he couldn't possibly make it in there to save them because the flames were just too high between him. And then he found out that what he was actually looking at was a reflection of flames in a mirror.
Wow.
And so he had to reconcile what he cognitively knew to be the case, but the fact that emotionally he couldn't attempt the thing.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of thing you have to pray you never have anything get anywhere near something like that.
Right, but that's what you write about. I mean,
well, I mean, and things too in a moment like that, or a moment of just out and out cowardice, which can certainly happen, or excess or whatever. I think it's funny how the ability to, whoops, I'm about to get hit by a truck here, speaking of which, the ability to recover from that has a lot to do with being a little bit free of ego, because the reason you can't recover from it is that you did this terrible thing. The person who's supposed to be one above reproach. And it's hard. It's hard. I've done small, tiny little thoughtless things and just agonized about them for weeks. And then at the end said, actually, this is an ego problem. If you were somewhat less attached to your image of yourself as a great guy, you would have probably gotten over this 2 or 3 weeks ago.
There was a doctor in Gainesville, Florida, where I used to live, Dr. Lukowski, and he was driving down 39th Boulevard, and this kid just darted in front of him, and he killed the little kid. And the next Monday, he was back at work helping people and taking care of them and all that. And I'm thinking to myself, how could he do that? Well, it wasn't his fault, and he knew that he had to keep on going, and I always admired him for that.
Yeah, I think so. I had a thing when I was in high school. I drove a delivery truck for my dad. He had a restaurant. And so I was kind of a beginning driver, a little cocky, and so it was this 76 or something Chevy van with a real short front end. So I was driving through this residential neighborhood. Probably, the limit was probably 25, and I was probably going 38 or something like that. And from the right-hand side, this little kid came running out, and he ran right in front of the van, and I twisted it to the right, and he just cleared the bumper on the driver's side. He actually ran all the way in front of the van, and I'd gone right. And I just remember sitting there with the brakes locked up, the wheel twisted all the way, totally out of my hands. And he did one of those things that sprinters do, where he arches back, and missed him by that much. And I thought that could have been my life. Because I wouldn't have been as as intelligent or as sophisticated as your doctor friend. I think I would have, and I was feeding also. So it's weird when you think that that's kind of the fact that we're both sitting here talking and having a nice talk and aren't guilt-ridden or sorrow-ridden is kind of a lucky, incredibly fortunate thing. And so I think in fiction you can kind of, creep towards those ideas a little bit and remind ourselves that if you're happy and well-fed and you have peace of mind, you didn't create those things. Those are, conditional, and so you should certainly enjoy them. And like your doctor friend, you should go out and do the best work you can while you're sane, and healthy and so on.
Right. And what people don't do in your books, but what you can't, and I do this, you do it too, is like you can't take it for granted. Every morning you wake up.
Right.
It's like when you're a kid and people say, as long as you have your health. And I was a kid and I couldn't understand, what the hell are they talking about? That makes no sense at all.
Right.
And now at the age of 60, I realize, that's exactly right. I don't want to be in a walker with tennis balls on the front, and I don't want to have little 2 oxygen hoses coming out and logging behind an oxygen canister.
Right, and the thing you realize is you will be. If you're lucky.
That's what my brother says. Don't say that to me.
No, but that's right. You will have either that or you'll just skip that and die right away. But to me, that's one of the interesting things about life is to say, it can't happen to me, and yet it's going to. And that's where you get into the real interesting
doing that. You're not supposed to.
Except to you. I'm
going to need therapy now after this.
Yeah, well,
Well, we've now talked for 54 minutes, which luckily after this show is just old 50s, 60s rock and roll. But I've kept you for a long time. But are you by the side of the road or something?
I am, yeah. And I actually probably have to head out because I got another one at 12:20, and I would be in a different place to take it. But
okay, last question. Last question on the cover. Well, did you get to vet this cover, or did they just give it to you?
Oh, I got to vet it
because I like it's black and white and it's triangular from the right down to the left on both. Well, whatever, but it's not yin and yang, but right. it's like this black and white, which is exactly what the reader has to wrestle with in your book. What were you thinking?
I saw that and I just loved it.
I love it too.
The designer, Claudia Cardinal, and I saw her. I just met her briefly at a reading, and she said, if you have about 3 hours, I can tell you all the things that cover means. And I said, you know what? I already know. You got it. I thought it was so arresting and a little bit like we talked about earlier. That if you look at that cover. Whatever read you've had of the book, I think you can find, if you say, why is the word divided, you can kind of make a case for it. So that's a beautifully executed cover, I thought.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, and thanks for taking time out of your day and sitting on the side of the road for so long. I really appreciated talking to you.
It was a total pleasure talking to you, and I think you're probably right about the not dying part for you. So.
Good. And don't use that bowling trophy thing, please.
I promise I won't.
Or if you do, give me $100 or $200 if you do it.
All right, 150.
Well, no, you got all that money from the MacArthur thing. Give me 200.
All right, 200.
All right.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks very much, as always, for joining us on the Avid Reader today. We talked about the new book by GeorgeSaunders, another collection of his short stories. Some consider it the best. I do. It's called The 10th of December. It was released January of this year. It's a great book. He was a great guest. He and I think about a lot of the same things. He's just able to articulate them in such a great form, and I'm always kind of jealous and envious of that, which goes exactly to the projective thinking that he was talking about during the interview. Next week, we'll have another Pulitzer Prize winner or somebody who's won the Guggenheim or the MacArthur, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate Ryan at our office being able to put together these shows and getting these great authors to come and talk to us, because I sure as heck couldn't do it. In any event, thanks as always for joining us, and we will talk to you, or I'll talk to somebody next week, and you'll listen. Talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the Avid Reader Show with your host, Sam Hankin. Sam will be back next week with reviews and interviews of some of the more interesting books and authors of today.